Oh, hi there. Ollie Anderson here. You're listening to Creative Status. This is a podcast where we talk about reality, growing real, embracing ourselves and life unconditionally so that we can move towards our own nature and to evolve towards wholeness, connection in ourselves, the level of our emotions and intellect and all that kind of thing, but also a connection to other people and the world around us. Ultimately, what we're dealing with here on the podcast is universal themes that apply to everybody, of course, because that's what universal means. I always end up saying it like that. Today's interview, because we're back on the interview episodes, is with Stanford Smith. Stanford is the host of the Big Diesel Fit Show. I was on his podcast a couple of months ago, and Stanford is a really interesting guy. He's a professional truck driver, but now he's currently living in Thailand. He's done 2 million miles on the open highway, and what I wanted to do in this interview is just see what he learned about life as a whole from spending so much time on the road, being a truck driver, just what it taught him about himself, about human beings in general. I really want to do more interviews like this with people that are doing things that generally get taken for granted, like truck driving. There are so many truck drivers all around the world now, working their asses off and just living the human experience in a very kind of profound way when you kind of dive into it. I actually think that anything can teach us about human beings and being real, because like the truth is everywhere. What's real is always real. And just finding things like this, truck driving and cracking it open, is just really interesting to me. So I'm going to try and find more things like this. But anyway, Stanford, thank you so much for sharing your experience. I thought you were awesome. I threw some truly curveball questions at you and you just smashed them all out of the park. So everybody, I really enjoyed this conversation. Stanford, thank you again. Hope this helps everyone who's listening. Here we go. Boom. Well, hi there, Stanford. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of Creative Status. This is going to be a very interesting one because we're going to take something that most people don't necessarily think of in a creative process, which is truck driving, and we're going to try and explore it and see what we can learn about the human condition. We may fail spectacularly. If we do, I'll take total responsibility for that. But I think we're going to smash it. Before we get into it, do you just feel like introducing yourself, sharing a little bit of your story, maybe telling people what you're all about, and also just sharing what you want to get out of this conversation that we're about to have?
Well, my name is Stanford Smith, and I'm a retired truck driver now. Started driving in 2000, retired in 2023, just at the end of 23. And right now I'm living in Thailand and learning Thai. Wow. So retired from trucking now, sold my truck and everything in the States. But from now on, though, I would like to just get out of this conversation. It's just wisdom about trucking itself and the depression and just the mental state that you go through being out there. As far as like being a lot of truckers, you see that the glamour a lot of times, and a lot of people talk about how fun it is, but there's a lot of stress in the background that people don't like to mention.
Okay. I think that's a really interesting starting point. What I was trying to do before this conversation was just think about how truck driving can be kind of a metaphor for a certain way of living. And I might be getting carried away, but like when I was thinking it, I basically broke it down to the idea that truck driving is just a really kind of goal-focused way of living and being in the world. And what I mean by that is you're in your truck and basically you just have very specific goals that you have to chase, which are delivering things to certain places and then picking something else up and delivering it elsewhere. And then in between that, those periods of picking things up and dropping them off or whatever, you're just kind of alone in your truck with your thoughts, kind of just living this human experience that we call life and trying to make some sense of it. And now, obviously, I've never been a truck driver, so that might just be all bullshit, everything I said. But what I want to try and figure out is what you learned from just being in that goal-focused way of being and also spending a lot of time kind of being isolated, I guess, on the road. I think there are some romantic things about that because like life is a journey and all that kind of thing. But it sounds like on your experience, boiling it down to that basic way of just chasing goals over and over again isn't necessarily enough. It's an important part of being human, but we need more. So I'm throwing a lot at you. That's how I'm kind of seeing this. Maybe the question is, what was it about truck driving and just being in that, going from point A to point B over and over again kind of process? What was it that you felt made you feel a bit depressed maybe, or made you feel like there's more? And what was the more that you feel like you needed?
Well, it takes a lot out of you when you're gone from your family a lot. So when you don't get a chance to see your kids grow up, or you don't get a chance to be with your, significant other as much. And either, when I first started driving, I wasn't in a marriage or anything like that, but, I went through a lot of different girlfriends. And so it's tough because you're thinking that, oh, this girl is probably going to be cheating on me or something. But then after a while, that's sort of the lifestyle that you come to just accept, because you run into other drivers and it's the same story. And then, back then you used to have when I first started driving in 2000, you used to have the payphones. And so a lot of the drivers were all sitting in one big room, like a big lounge room. So you can kind of overhear a lot of conversations. Yeah. And so people, guys are talking on the phone. That's a lot of the conversations that I used to hear all the time was about, their girlfriend basically, kind of running around. And when you're talking to guys, they mention it. And that's what it is that after a while, you just accept it. That these girls are going to be out, doing their thing. And so that's part of, being able to be a driver and just knowing that, most likely, that girl is out with somebody else because you're gone for months at a time. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So you've taken it to a much deeper level than I thought we were going to go. That's super cool. So it's almost like what you're saying is like one of the things that you learned from, this lifestyle you were living is that actually one of the, I don't know if I'm getting too dramatic, but like one of the keys to happiness is actually just stability, staying in the same place, building roots and having connections and all that kind of thing. But there is a bit of a myth, and like you kind of talked about it right at the start. You said there's a glamour around truck driving where, you're out on the open road and you're just kind of having all these crazy adventures and like hanging around with other truckers and like, I don't know, like having parties, whatever it is people do. But actually I guess there's a cost. Like it sounds like you had a lot of freedom, but the freedom came with a kind of price. And so maybe there's something here around balance or something like that. Like I suppose, is there a sweet spot where you do have the freedom, but you also have the roots as well? Like, is that what ultimately people need?
Oh yeah, that's definitely what's needed in it is to have some type of freedom. But the way that they work us is drivers are working 14-hour days. And so you pretty much have to work that, especially if you're going over the road, because once your 14 hours is up, the dispatcher is pretty much calling you on the phone.
Wow.
And, you get like a 10-hour break. And as soon as it's up, they're calling you, pretty much where you're going to have to keep on going and keep on putting in the miles for that day. You got to, work another 14 hours that day. And so you're treated now like a robot. Mm-hmm. So before, when I first started driving, there was a lot more freedom to it, whereas it wasn't as computerized. So you didn't have all of everything, the GPS and all that type of stuff and people monitoring you and everything. You kind of were at your own pace there almost. You can write down where you're at, and if you needed to take a nap or something like that, you had more freedom back then. Now you don't have that anymore. That's been gone for a while now, and it's just getting worse really. So I could imagine, I know that I was starting to get, going downhill with it because a lot of the fun was taken away from it because of all of the technology.
Yeah.
And so, that plays a big role in it too. And it just makes it even more of a depressing mode because you get in that drag that you have to keep doing this. Otherwise the computer stops, or, if you run out of time on there, then someone's calling you. Why aren't you moving? Why aren't you, sitting still? So it's a lot of pressure on you that no one really talks about that part a lot.
Yeah.
But you have to keep moving all the time. You don't really, it's not just, you're just touring around in cities and you're taking a break whenever you want to and enjoying life.
Yeah.
You're driving through places, but you don't really get a chance to get out and enjoy anything.
Yeah. Wow. Like, it is really interesting. Like, there's this image of, I guess it's like, I'm not American, but like this great American kind of road trip thing that people have. You're blasting down Route 66 or whatever it is. And truck driving kind of feeds into that, like the American dream of just having freedom, and you can go wherever you want and you can do this, you can do that. Independence. But actually, like, it sounds like there's two things going on. Like, if you have too much independence, then you just end up becoming kind of disconnected from your human nature. Like, it can affect your relationships. You become isolated because you're separate from other people, and we all need each other and all that kind of stuff. That's one arm of this. But then there's this other arm, which is like the cultural thing. And it's this super stimulating thing that you just shared about like technology. And it's not just truck driving, is it? It's like all areas of life. We're becoming slaves to these machines, to computers, the algorithm. On social media, everyone is basically deciding that they're going to post certain content because, Facebook or Google have told them that they have to do it in a certain way. If you work in an Amazon factory, then you become completely dehumanized, and the computer is like monitoring your productivity and blah, blah, blah. And it's the same with truck driving. And so it sounds like this, I know we're just talking about truck driving, but what we're actually talking about is this kind of conflict between human beings and who we are when we're most real versus, I guess, society at large, and how society can kind of crush our human spirit if we're not careful. And technology is really kind of feeding into that. So I guess my question for you now, if I'm not getting too excited and carried away, is what did this kind of, I guess, negative experience that you had in the truck driving industry, what did it teach you about who you really are? And what I mean is, like, what did it teach you about your real needs, your real values, like what you really actually want from life? And I suppose what it was that made you kind of quit truck driving and, go your own way and find that freedom and so on that you actually really wanted.
Well, I initially, when I started driving, it was fun at first. I think the first couple of years, you're having a lot of fun. You're seeing a lot of new adventures, and you're going to different cities and things like that. It's fun at first. I had a lot of fun. It wasn't my initial goal that I wanted to do in life. I went to college for computer programming, and so that's what I wanted to do at first. But then I ended up driving trucks. And so, I always had that goal in the back of my mind that one day that I would eventually get back into programming. And so I kept that as a hobby. It was hard to do, though, very hard to do. It was, trying to work all the time, working 14 hours a day. And then you thinking that even though you get that 10-hour break, you're going to have some time to do something, but you may not be in a good area. You don't know what time you're going to stop, and you may be really tired. It's a lot of things that can go on that you can't really plan for anything. But it wasn't always a negative experience. I learned a lot from it. And a lot of the things that I did learn was survival techniques and just being out with no one around you a lot of times. And a lot of it was a lot of fear too. And a lot of times what I think that everyone has fear. I think that it's natural to have some type of fear because it protects you. But if you're afraid of the dark, or if you're afraid that someone's going to attack you or something like that, that's something that you need to work on personally. And so things like that, with especially like some type of fears of me just being out in the open in the dark with no one around.
Yeah.
Sometimes I would park my truck in the middle of Arizona, out in the middle of the desert with no one around, absolutely nothing, just, nothing at all. And, and I would sleep there and I would get used to that. And after a while, the fear of all the darkness and being alone and just being away, just not having anyone around and just knowing that everything is okay. Wow. It was kind of a touching thing. You kind of get in touch with yourself that way. Yeah. I think I learned a lot from that, doing things like that.
Yeah. Let's dig into that more, because for me, I think that is the creative process. So ultimately, it sounds like truck driving initially, it was an opportunity for you to face yourself in the way that you just mentioned. But ultimately, the way that it allowed you to do that was that it put you in this situation where you basically found your edge. The edge is just a word that I use for that place that you talked about, where you have to confront your fears, basically. Your identity meets reality, and you have to kind of look at some of the things you might have been hiding from yourself. You have to face certain uncomfortable truths about life, that we're vulnerable or that we're alone sometimes or whatever it is. And you have to come to terms with all that stuff. But when you do come to terms with it, you basically become much, much stronger. Like, you become a much more real and more powerful version of yourself. And all these things that you just said, like the fear of the darkness and the fear of being alone, that's really like primal stuff. Like, you're talking about some of those primal fears that like human beings have. And you've evolved past that by putting yourself in this situation. I suppose over time, like, because you got caught up in the monotony and you'd reached that point of, having faced your fears and going to that next level, when you were caught in the kind of the repetitive nature of just going back and forth and doing all the same things and the buzz wore off, that's probably when it became a bit more negative. But that was just your inner self, I guess, calling you to the next level, which is why you quit and now you're living in Thailand and you're doing all that kind of stuff. But in those moments where you were facing your fear and you were, facing the solitude and all that kind of thing, what did you learn there, I guess, about like just being, like, at the most basic level, like just being human and dealing with that kind of stuff? Like, have you got anything you can share maybe that might help other people to come to terms with that so they can go, I guess, to the next level as well?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, when you're out there alone, and especially once you don't get a chance to, like, the way that I did it was that I was actually living on the truck. Some drivers will go home for a couple months or so and then they'll come back out. Well, I chose to actually live on the truck, and I lived on the truck for about 5 years at one point, and then I would take a little break here and there where I'm just doing like everyone else, going back and forth. But I've always kind of had like a single life, and so I've been able to do that. But a lot of people, of course, they can't do it like that, where they're staying out for, years at a time like that. I'm sure they definitely would get a divorce then.
Yeah.
But just being out there and just learning about how to survive, as far as how to cook for yourself, because you're only going to get so much money. And I was an owner operator, and so I had to pay for all of everything myself. I was running a business myself. And so when you're got your back against the wall like that, you got to pay for everything. You learn how to save your money and what to spend it on. You learn how to cook while you're out there, and just being like, it's like almost the way that I would do it is I had like a butane stove, and I would put that in my truck, and it had a refrigerator. And so I would cook my meals and have my, my water and stuff like that. And I would take little showers outside of the truck sometimes. Sometimes I had to take showers inside the truck because you're in the snow. And, but it teaches you how to survive, really. If you really stay out there long enough, you learn a lot about yourself.
5 years is a long time to be like doing that. It's amazing. So there's two questions I want to ask you, I guess. Like the first one, like what you've done, if you think about it, it's actually like not many people have probably had that experience. Like you ultimately kind of took yourself out of mainstream society for a 5-year period, and you were kind of living off grid almost and learning from this kind of like raw version of life, how to deal with life, how to deal with yourself, how to deal with your fear and all that kind of thing. I think there's probably some really important lessons there just around fear in general, because most people are holding back from the life that they want and from trusting life for one reason and one reason only, and it's fear. And I think there's something around just putting ourselves in difficult situations that can make us more real. Like ultimately the end result of you going through this process is you learned about yourself, you gain more awareness of who you are, and you've learned to accept yourself and life to a deeper level. So I'm just going to prompt you a little bit more about the fear thing. Like how do you see fear now? Now that you've been through that, how do you just see like just fear in general, like the kind of day-to-day fears people have about, I guess, paying bills or like worrying about relationships and things they can't control basically. Like how do you see fear now that you've been through that?
Well, I definitely look at it different now because I don't worry as much, because when you're out, and especially when it comes to just having fear about being able to pay your bills or, things of that nature, when you're going through all these certain places, and America is beautiful. It is absolutely beautiful. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people don't know that because they only stay in one part of the area. But once you get out and drive around, it's a lot of amazing things. But there is a lot of things that are not so pleasant also. And that teaches you a lesson too, because I've driven through a lot of places where there is a lot of poverty, and you see certain things that makes you look at life differently certain times, because you're out there with these people. Because, a lot of times when I pull into neighborhoods, I don't know where I'm at. I've been in some of the worst neighborhoods where I have to park my truck at. And people coming up to my truck at night, drug addicts, knocking on my door. And so that, dealing with that and just realizing that people are people, and there's good and bad, and you can be in a fearful situation, but you don't have to be in fear of the situation that you're in. And that's what kind of taught me a lot, because I would get out in some of these neighborhoods and it was almost like I didn't know, but I did know. I'll tell you a quick little story, real fast, but it was one time I had to do a delivery in Montana, and I parked my truck. No, I'm sorry. It was Yellowstone, California. And so I parked my truck. I had a delivery up there, and I get out the truck and I'm walking around, and I saw all the signs that says bear, be aware of bears everywhere. But it didn't really dawn on me that there's bears on the track that I'm walking on.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Okay. And so, someone that was local there pulled up next to me real fast, and I'm just walking down a dirt road, and she pulled up to me and she said, hey, you, obviously you're not from around here, get in here. Are you crazy or something? There's bears out here.
Wow. And
so, I said, oh, I'm a truck driver. My truck is parked right up here. And so she gave me a ride to my truck, and I thanked her. I'm like, oh, okay. But I was just wandering around, just walking down the path, not really knowing. Yeah. But she said, she was telling me the whole story. Like, people get mauled by bears up here all the time.
Wow.
And, but anyway, though, just, I just kind of brought that back. But when I'm parking in certain neighborhoods, I get out and I'll walk around, and I know that I'm not in good neighborhoods. But if you have to go to the store, or if you have to go somewhere, you can't be in fear of it. So you're going to have to overcome that.
Yeah.
And so, it was, you get in situations, certain times where you have no choice but to overcome things.
Yeah. Like, actually, it's funny you mentioned bears. Like, I got chased by bears once when I was living in Japan. It's like the most scared I've ever been in my life. It's also the fastest I've ever run. And it was kind of a similar thing. Like, I was just walking around in these mountains, kind of, I guess, a bit naively from my point of view, like just kind of expecting everything to be fine. And then suddenly these bears were there. And I was scared. Like, I've never been so scared in my life. Anyway, there's a quote that you just said. I think it's the quote of the day. You said, you can be in a situation, but you don't have to fear the situation you're in. For me, that kind of sums up this kind of real attitude towards life that I'm always trying to uncover and get people to understand. I'm going to say it again. This is what you said. I'm quoting you to yourself, but like, you can be in a situation, but you don't have to fear the situation you're in. I think if you can do that, then it's almost like a superpower. And the way that I've learned to do that in my own life is to learn to trust. I think basically for me, the opposite of fear is trust. Trusting ourselves to be able to handle whatever happens, like the consequences of our decisions and all that kind of stuff as well, but also trusting life. And I think if we can do that, then even when life seems kind of crazy around us and like, you know, there's difficult people or there's difficult situations or whatever it is, we can stay kind of grounded and we can stay kind of centered in ourselves. And that allows us to kind of overcome the fear. It's not that we don't feel the fear. It's almost just like we don't take it on board, or we don't allow it to have power over us because we've got this trust. And so I guess my question for you is that similar to what you meant when you said that? You can be in a situation, but you don't have to fear the situation. Like, how do you do that, I guess? Like, how do you be in a stressful situation or a fearful situation, but you don't let the fear get to you?
Well, I think that for me, it started back in, in like 2000 for me was, I would say that I found God in my life, and it was, overdue or due to an overdose on drugs that I started, and I stopped doing drugs. And so, yeah, that was in my younger years when I was a lot younger, way before I started driving trucks. But it was, back then that really changed my life as far as how I fear anything really, because I really wanted to, to really know about everything. And so I started to really see that we're not really in control of a lot of things that happen.
Yeah.
And so when I started thinking about that, especially when you think about people that you lose over your life, and then you start to think about it like, man, that person passed away 5 minutes and I was going to go see him, or I would have been there at that point in time or something like that. And seeing things like that and just experiencing that over time, it just brought me to that conclusion that it's really nothing to really fear about, because I'm not really totally in control of everything. I may think I am, but I realize that I'm not really in control of everything around me, but I can't possibly be in control of everything around me. So I can't control what this person is thinking or that person is thinking or what they're going to do when I walk into a certain environment. So it's kind of like a nonsense thing. You think after a while when you're sitting around and, for being alone for so many hours at a time, you start to think a lot about a lot of things like that you wouldn't normally even have time to even think about. But when you're driving for hours and hours, you think about a lot of things, and things like that. I would just think about like that seems ridiculous for me to be afraid of something that I have no control over. Or that I'm conscious that I know that I really have no control over this situation. And so for me to be fearful about it is, you start to think that's kind of ridiculous after a while. So the fear goes away.
That's amazing. That's like exactly how I've experienced it. Like, if you realize that you don't have control and you have to surrender to some things in life, then the fear dissolves, because you realize it's not in your hands in any way, shape or form. And so it's almost like you just let go. Like, for me now, that's all trust is. We just let go. Whatever happens, so be it. And I think in a way, this story that you just shared about like trust and letting go, it brings us kind of full circle. Like at the start of this conversation, when I started ranting and raving about how I saw truck driving as like a little metaphor for like a certain way of living, I was kind of looking at it as though truck driving, especially this modern version that you've talked about, where it's all dictated by the computer software and, you know, the constant monitoring because the GPS and all this kind of stuff. That way of living means that everything is controlled, basically. They're trying to put you in a little box where every little moment of your life is controlled. So the GPS is monitoring you, like they're looking at how fast you're driving. They know if you're on track with the, you know, the number of targets that they send you every day and blah, blah, blah. That is control to the extreme. But that kind of control, it goes against our human nature. Like our human nature is actually not to have total control. And like if we do let go of control, that's when we can actually grow. That's when we can expand. That's when we can evolve. That's when we can kind of face life without fear in the way that we talked about, because control is not real. It's like a construct. And so I suppose there's a question for you there, like, is what I'm saying aligned with how you now see things? Because it sounds like ultimately, like, you had a lot of freedom at first when you started being a truck driver. You learned all these things we were talking about. Like, you learned about yourself. You became more aware. You learned to not fear. You learned about survival, all that amazing stuff. But then there was more and more control introduced to the equation, which kind of went against your nature as a human being. And that's when you basically reach this point where you're like, right, this isn't for me anymore. Like, I need to go kind of surrender to like actual life rather than all of these computer programs and stuff like that. I don't know. What do you think? Like, am I getting carried away? Like, I do sometimes get carried away.
Oh, not at all. Not at all. I mean, you're exactly right on point, because that is something that I was just talking about a few days ago, was that the control now is ridiculous. And so it's at a point now where all the fun pretty much has been taken out of it. It's not an adventure fun thing anymore. Definitely not. It's a robot.
Yeah.
And, you know, what they are trying to do is they're trying to make them driverless trucks. And they do have a few of them. I've seen them up in certain states, up in Utah and Montana, some of the states that are way far out with not a lot of traffic. I've seen some of their driverless trucks that they have, and they do have a co-driver in there with them, but they're you know, doing that stuff now. But yeah, it's turned into where it's just a few companies now that are big, huge corporations now just want total control over all trucking now. And that's the point that it's gotten to now. And they have, a lot of the trucks have cameras inside of them. Some of the companies I work for are a company that they don't really tell you that there's a camera watching you, but they make you fill out all this paperwork. And when you're filling out this huge, big old book of paperwork, it's in there telling you that there is a camera in the truck, but you don't really know it though. You don't see it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so a lot of companies are doing that, and they're just really on you as far as like your break time, because you only get one 30-minute break, but then you get a 10-hour rest break where you can go to sleep. And as soon as that 10 hours is up, if someone's not on the phone with you, or, you know, they're sending you a message or something all the time. And it's just, like I said, it didn't used to be like that. And so now it's really just robotic.
Yeah. Like, yeah. Ultimately, what you just shared, like, I know I already said this, but it's like a big problem with society as a whole. Like, the fact that they're trying to get to that point where they have driverless trucks, or, you know, in other industries, they're trying to get AI to take over in call centers and all these kind of things. Like, the fact that they're trying to get driverless trucks shows you that they actually don't care about the drivers in any way, shape, or form. Like, they just want the drivers to perform tasks, basically. That's it. That's the only function of the driver as far as they're concerned. And when the robots can do a better job, they'll get rid of them. And I think that's why, like, this conversation has shown me really, like, that human beings, they need certain things to just be real. And it's all of the things we're talking about. We need freedom, we need growth, we need to face our fears, we need to trust and all that kind of thing. And as soon as you introduce the opposite of that into the equation, you just end up dehumanizing the humans and making life worse. But it seems like society as a whole is kind of been forced in that direction. I don't think we'll go along with it as a collective, let's say. But like the big companies are definitely pushing in that direction to dehumanize by asserting control, basically. But control, if it's too much control, is always against human nature. So I'm ranting and raving, but I've got one more question for you that I wanted to ask. So you had this five-year period where you were just living in your truck and you were out there doing your thing, facing your fears, all this kind of thing. What did that teach you about, I guess, just normal society? Like, because you were outside of it for quite a prolonged period, I know you were interacting with people and things like that, but you were kind of off grid. Like, how do you see the world now, let's say, as a product of going through that?
Well, I definitely changed a lot, because when I first started driving, I would say that I was into politics and all that, drama, listening to that a lot on the radio. And as I started noticing that it's all pretty much the same.
Yeah.
And once you start to sit back and look at it, you can see it, because it's the same arguments that's been going on for 50 years. And so after a while, I started getting away from that. And then I was able to sort of look at life differently from just listening to TV shows all the time or listening to the news all the time, because I didn't have, a lot of access to that. But I did have access to satellite radio. And so I would listen to a lot of shows on there, especially a lot of the trucking shows, and listening to just a lot of things that I wouldn't even normally have time to listen to. And I would listen to them for hours and hours, book readings. I would listen to shows, a lot of different things that I would just listen to for hours and hours, because I had so much time to just listen and just kind of just be in that own little zone. So I look at life a lot different now, because especially when I first started driving, then the way that I look at it now is that it doesn't seem like it's as important now. Like life is important, but it's not it's not a lot of pressure as much, I think, as far as I was when I first started driving.
Wow.
And just kind of being under pressure a lot.
Like, ultimately, I think, I'm going to sound very dramatic again, right? But like, ultimately, truck driving for you, and probably for many other people, it was a transformational experience. Like, you went through a kind of transformation. Like, when you went into that experience, you had a lot more fear. You were not necessarily as aware and accepting of yourself as you now are. And you saw the world as being way more serious than it actually is. Now you've been through that process and you've faced your fear, you faced your edge and all the things we talked about. The end result is that you've become more grounded in who you really are. And that's amazing, because it shows we can use literally anything to grow and become more human. Like, at the start of this conversation, I was ranting and raving again. I was saying, like, ideally what I want to do is just look at what truck driving can teach us about the human experience. And I think what I've just learned is literally anything can be used as a vehicle for transformation. And I think that's very creative. What we're gonna start wrapping up, but what are you doing now? Because obviously you're not a truck driver now. Where have you ended up? I know you said you're in Thailand and stuff, but just for the audience, I guess, like, what's your life like now? Like, how are you feeling and all that kind of thing?
Oh, well, now I'm doing great now. I feel a lot better, a lot of the pressure is being relieved now.
Yeah.
So, but I still, my heart is still in trucking a lot of times, because I do feel for those guys and the ladies that are out there and the things that I have to go through. And so that's why I had started my podcast, and I wanted to talk about it too, was there is a lot of pressure under it, and it's a stressful situation. And, I gained a lot of weight. I went through a lot of different changes through those 23 years. And I know we don't have time to talk about it tonight, but there was a whole lot of different changes that you go through. And so if I can, tell people that are getting into it what to expect and kind of be aware of it. And so just to bring some type of awareness to it. But right now I do a lot of video editing, some website design. So I've gotten back into my field that I originally started off at. And like I said, I always kind of kept it as a hobby. And so now I'm just full time doing that.
Yeah. That's an amazing story. Like, Stanford, thank you so much for sharing all this. If you were going to sum this conversation up, if you can, I guess, how would you do it? Like, what have we learned just now, if we've learned anything? And also, can you let people know, where they can find you online if you want to share your social media or your podcast, obviously, and anything you've got?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The podcast is the Big Diesel Fitness Podcast. It's Big Diesel Fit Podcast show.
Yeah.
And I have a YouTube page. It's Let's Get, sorry about that. Let's Get Pumped Thailand. Let's Get Pumped Thailand. Yeah, it's YouTube, my YouTube channel.
Right. Well, I'll share both of those things in the show notes. What are your final words of wisdom for today?
Well, I would say that don't let this whole thing get you down. Life is just like trucking, it's a journey, and as long as you just try to stay positive and look at things in a positive way, whatever that is that you can, even if it's just a small can on the street, anything, just to kind of, keep you in a positive mood, because that's the only thing you have, really. And that's a lot of things. That's what I really learned, is that you getting down there on yourself, or you're feeling bad about yourself, that, oh, this person is out doing this on me, but there's nothing you can do about it. You're the only one that's feeling bad about it. So you might as well just have a positive attitude about everything every day, because, it's always something bad going on, it seems like, that you could, you can focus on if you wanted to.
Just trust. Stanford, that was awesome. Like, thank you so much. Like, I'm really happy we did this. Thanks a bunch.
Oh yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, my little mic here kept going out in and out there. I hope it's working okay.
It sounded good, man. Thanks again.
Okay, all right, appreciate it. Thank you.